Today we're going to cover the spinal cord, the anatomy of the spinal cord, and just sort of a general overview of the nervous system. So here's the nervous system. We can break it down sort of into the central nervous system. The central nervous system being the brain and the spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system, which is all the nerves going out from the spinal cord to the rest of the body, which we can then break into somatic, which controls things like muscles, and autonomic, which controls a lot of your organs. So here's sort of a breakdown of the nervous system into sort of different components. So we're talking about the central nervous system, and we can break that into the brain and the spinal cord. And then you have the peripheral nervous system, which we can break down into two parts. The somatic, which controls all the motor neurons going out to muscles. So that's the somatic nerves. And then you have all of your sensory nerves coming in, and those are all coming back up. So anything that you actually can identify that there's perception to, any touch or pain or movement of your arm, which your brain uses as feedback, that's called proprioception, all come through this somatic sensory system. And then you have the whole parallel autonomic one, which is controlling all the organs. And this is all the stuff that you don't think about. Your blood pressure control is controlled by the brain, but not through, you can maybe train yourself to actually control your blood pressure and things like that, but it's not something you think about. And that's broken down into the sympathetic nervous system, which is what usually happens when you're excited, and then parasympathetic, which happens when you're sort of calm. And we'll talk about the different effects of sympathetic and parasympathetic. So here's the peripheral nerves, so everything outside of the spinal cord and the central brain. So you have your somatic, the conscious, controlling your motor, and then your sensory coming in, and then your visceral or autonomic, which is controlling all your organs. Organs, blood vessels, your glands, so salivary glands, your adrenal glands, your oxygen pressure, pressure. Have you guys done the brain actually really detects concentrations of carbon dioxide, right? And so regulates the blood flow based upon the concentration of carbon dioxide. So you can actually hyperventilate, and your brain thinks that it doesn't need more oxygen, so it contracts the blood and blood vessels, and you can black out by hyperventilation. So even though you're lacking oxygen, you've gotten rid of all of your carbon dioxide, and you can black out from doing that. So it's kind of an interesting. Has anybody done that? Hyperventilated to black out? You never did that as a kid, where you'd hold your breath. No, what was it? Yeah, that is kind of a sick game. I never played it. You hyperventilate and then you hold, and then somebody punches you and you black out. Maybe your friends are slightly different than mine. Okay, so here are some examples of sensory nerves in the skin, and you have a bunch of different kinds of nerves in the skin. So this is, one of our sensory organs. The skin is really important. And, from an engineering point of view, there are nerves are broken down to detect different aspects of sensory inputs. So they have sort of different filtering characteristics. Some are designed to act really fast, but then go away really quick, so it can detect the onset of something like a touch. But then it doesn't really keep information with if somebody's sustaining some kind of touch on it. You habituate, which means you stop feeling that pretty rapidly. But there are some that fire. So those guys fire really quickly. So one example is the Pancinian corpuscle. And you can see that's this big guy here. And whenever you touch the skin, it actually starts firing really fast, but then stops firing very, very quickly, even if you keep your finger or something touching. Whereas there's Ruffini endings, which are these sort of blob-like things here. So this is the actual nerve ending sort of spread out. and it doesn't react very quickly to a touch, but it will keep firing as long as there's pressure there. So it really detects pressure and sustains high firing. So it detects it. If you like pull on your skin, you feel sort of a tug, 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 and then you start feeling a little bit of pain. Like that. That's the Ruffini ending starting to kick in, going, no, 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 don't stretch anymore. You got to change what you're doing. The Meissner corpuscles. These are these guys sitting right at the surface. These guys are what go off when you do really light touch, so that sort of tickle feeling. Those are exciting, those Meissner corpuscles, whereas these guys are much more deep and detect, down here, they detect more of a depression. And then Merkel's discs, where are those guys? These are also up the surface. So we have some that are deep and some at the surface, ones that are quickly adapting and slowly adapting. And then you have thermoreceptors, which detect hot and cold. And this is actually off the screen here. There's Krauss end bulbs, which detect hot, and then Ruffini end organs, which is off the screen here, Krauss end detect cold and Ruffini's detect hot. So different kinds of signals that are being transduced into a neural activity and then sent up to the spinal cord and up into the brain so that you can make some kind of behavioral change. There's a lot of pain receptors. Pain receptors are really important in that pain is really the most common reason somebody goes into the doctor. Like they have pain. And between headaches or something. So it's sort of the universal signal that something is wrong. And there's lots of different kinds of pain receptors. There's a lot of pain receptors designed to detect some kind of trauma or injury. There's ones that are and then there's ones that are mechanically gated to protect you from injuring yourself, to detect when these things are happening. So these are proteases and potassium, STP, histamine. These are things that get released and trigger neurons in your skin to start firing away to indicate that something has gone wrong. Then these sensory neurons go up and through a long axon go and send signals back up to the spinal cord and up into the brain. Axons don't all transmit this signal at the same speed. Some are much faster, so things where you want really high fidelity in time, you actually put a really big fat axon in. It costs a lot more to maintain a fat axon, but it gives you much, much higher velocity. So here is alphas, which are the biggest. These are the ones that are used for proprioception, and also a lot of the sensory. It travels at, so the 13 to 20 microns in diameter. These are actually pretty huge axons. And then the speeds are 80 to 120 meters per second. So the amount of time to get from a signal touching your toe up to your brain is on the order of 15 to 25 milliseconds. And the brain, in order to even speed this up, insulates these axons, and that allows signals to sort of jump and travel much faster than it would if it continuously moved down. And that's called saltatory conduction. We'll talk about that when we talk about the nerves a little bit more in detail. So the A alphas are taking proprioception of skeletal muscles. They're the fastest. They're the ones that we want for feedback. You detect a change that in your arm angle or something, that's the fastest thing you want to go back and correct for without even thinking. And so those are really fast pathways. And then what's less fast, but still pretty fast, is the mechanoreceptors. So these are the ones detecting touch and things like that. And they're about half the speed, from 35 to 75 meters a second. So it takes about 26 to 60 milliseconds to get from your foot up to your brain. These are the A betas. And they actually have different names for if it's coming from skin sensors or from the muscles. So there's group ones if it's coming from muscles, group 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if it's coming from skin, A alpha, A beta, A delta, and C fibers. And then you have the slowest ones are actually the pain. And so you have pain ones like temperature, so you get fast reactions to to burning yourself. If you've ever heard. Have you ever heard of somebody saying they picked up a hot pan and they could actually smell the burning before they could actually feel it? And you pull it away and you smell the burn, and sometimes even before you feel the pain start hitting your hand. And so it can take, for the very slowest ones, which are the ones that give you that throbbing pain, it can take 1 to 4 seconds to get from your hand up to your brain. I mean, it's a very slow but a constant going on, things that last for weeks and months, the kind of pain you want to go away because you know that injury has already occurred, there's nothing you can do about it. But the ones that actually cause you to whip your hand back as soon as you touched it, those actually triggered things, reflexes, much faster than you can really think. And that's, a good protection system. It's still slower than a lot of your other the mechanoreceptors and things like you use to actually catch baseballs and things like that. But it's relatively fast. So here's an example, like you injure something, and the first thing in time you see is these A delta fibers activating, and that causes the reflex, and then you get this secondary pain that comes up later, which is that throbbing pain that happens. And that allows you to react long before you actually feel the noxious or perceive the noxious stimulus. The different kinds of painful stimuli, there's different kinds of nociceptors. There's thermal for temperature, mechanical to detect like stretch or cutting or something like that, and then polymodal, which will kind of just respond to anything that's happening that's sort of out of the ordinary. And then you have nerves that hyperalgesia, which this is the inflammatory response. This is the guys who primary is that you're getting pain from the tissue that was directly injured. And then you have, and then those guys, as they're cut and those cells spew out lots of signals to the surrounding area, that will cause an inflammatory response of the surround tissue, which is secondary. And you'll get a lot of pain. You'll get redness and pain from the surrounding tissue. So the motor neurons are what's actually sending signals from the brain down to the muscles. And there's a very special connection between nerves and muscles called the neuromuscular junction. And it's a specialized synapse. Muscles that are sort of broken down into sort of different, there's the ones sort of in the center of the body which are used for posterior, keeping you upright. So a lot of ones innervating the back and the trunk to adjust. And then there's ones that are moving your arms, and so fairly close in. And then you have the really detailed ones for moving fingers. And there's sort of not only did when we did this 2-point discrimination, you could see there was differences in sensitivity, but going the other way, there's differences in fidelity between how many nerves are going into a particular nerve, into a particular muscle, which controls how accurately you can control that muscle. So things like the lips and a lot of your facial muscles have lots and lots of nerves, almost down to one nerve per muscle fiber. Whereas places like your back, there's very, you need really gross movement, so we send a few nerves to innervate hundreds and hundreds of muscle fibers. And then you get nerves that are projecting directly to organs. And there's organs such as your tear ducts, your tear production, salivary glands, your lungs, your heart, your liver, your stomach, pancreas, your intestines, bladder, and your reproductive organs. All of these, you don't think about any of these things, but they're all constantly innervated. They're always constantly giving signals up to the brain. The brain is then sending signals out to upregulate, downregulate. And we divide this into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic responses. And so here's a list of the different organs, and then here's what the sympathetic does and the parasympathetic. So parasympathetic is activated when you are sort of calm in a restful state. The sympathetic is when you're excited. I call it the 4 Fs. So this is the first inappropriate joke of the season. Fight, flight, fright, and sex. You have the I, and under excitation, you dilate it, and that gives you higher sensitivity, more light coming in. And under parasympathetic, it constricts. Salivation, you actually decrease. You don't want to be choking on your own spit when you're running away from some kind of animal. In fact, it gets ropey and keeps it from being really liquid, whereas when you are sitting at a dinner table, you want lots of saliva, and it tends to be very liquidy. It constricts the blood vessels when you're really excited to get your blood going, and then it dilates to relax. Your lungs constrict under parasympathetic. Your heart rate goes up when you're being chased by something and slows down otherwise. Your liver starts to release glucose to start give you energy supply to start running. Whereas I'm guessing the opposite, starts storing up glucose on the other. Stomach, you increase digestion under parasympathetic. If you're really upset, you will throw up, and whereas adrenal glands, this starts pumping out epinephrine and norepinephrine that gives you that fright response. You know what that feels like when somebody surprises you. Your bladder relaxes under an exciting, and then contracts to help clean you out. And then reproductive organ actually has both roles, arousal under parasympathetic, and then you actually induce the sympathetic system to reach orgasm.